This is what everyone gets completely wrong about the Old Testament and about Abraham. I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of the book Consider My Servant Job, and this is Come Follow Me, Old Testament 1, 2, 3. Get to the point. So, Abraham, one of the monumental figures in world history. In fact, the world is, within the Mideast, it's just dominated by this man and what he did, and we get the chance to study this man's life. So, first of all, there's a lot of fun and interesting legends in this book here, Josephus again, but also Legends of the Jews and the book of Jasher, which I just don't have time to get into. This is get to the point, and I don't want to spend time studying about sort of secondary stuff that's actually quite interesting. So I'll put these in the link in the I'll put links to some of these locations in the notes at the bottom of this video. But we're just going to spend time focusing on the book of Abraham. So first of all, Abraham, let's start with the pearl of great price here. And we learned about Abraham, and the most interesting thing about Abraham is that his attitude towards righteousness and obedience. So, book of Abraham, chapter 1, verse 2. And finding there was greater happiness and peace and rest for me, I sought the blessings of the fathers, and the right whereunto I should be ordained to administer the same, having been myself a follower of righteousness, desiring to be one who possessed great knowledge, and a greater follower of righteousness, and to possess a greater knowledge, and to be a father of many nations. A prince of peace, that's a title of Christ, and also Melchizedek, and desiring to receive instructions and to keep commandments of God. I became a rightful heir, a high priest holding the right belonging to the fathers. Notice Abraham's attitude towards obedience, his attitude towards gaining knowledge, and his attitude toward being a priesthood holder. And compare that to kind of what goes on in your life or other people's attitudes. That's a shocking contrast. Okay, so also desires are important. Elder Downley Chokes gave a talk on desire a number of years ago, and I'll put the link in there. And part of what motivates Abraham is the wickedness. There's the wickedness of his father, and you read about these things in the old Jewish legends, but also with the sacrifice of the three young virgin, which reminds us of the sacrifice of the three lads in the book of Daniel. And it's interesting because he mentions the bed, in fact, simile number 1, the bed that upon which he was sacrificed. The fun thing is they found one of these type of beds in King Tut's tomb. So this is actually archaeological evidence that supports the book of Abraham at this one point. So another thing to point. So where am I? I got a little bit lost here. So point 3, Egypt. We learned about Egypt and that the country of Egypt in the time of Abraham's day or anciently imitated the priesthood order. They didn't have the priesthood, but they imitated it. Now, there's been some discussion about racial issues and stuff said in the past, and just as always, go back to the read Official Declaration number 2 and the Gospel Essay on Race and the Priest, and that covers that subject matter about the disavowals and things that were said in the past. Another thing, too, point 4, is that there's a record of the fathers. Again, you have to keep records. You're keeping a history. And one of the things with the records is the idea of astronomy, which crops up with Abraham chapter 3 and also facsimile number 3. But also Josephus mentions Abraham's facility with astronomy and how he taught it to the Egyptians. So we have these corroborating information. Yeah, Joseph Smith, he actually had a copy of Josephus's works, and at Carthage jail before he got assassinated, he was reading the Book of Mormon, of course, but he's also studying the words of Josephus, which is really kind of interesting. That he was, didn't take it as an infallible source, but he studied it. So Abraham in Egypt. So Abraham goes down to Egypt with to escape the famine, and brings his wife. And they have the instance where Abraham lies about his wife being a sister, and it's been explained different ways. And I think it's kind of interesting because the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish one, who's also a contemporary of Karl Bloch, who did the Crisis, Berthel's son. and also Hans Christian Andersen. All four of those men lived in Denmark at the same time. But Soren Kierkegaard kind of puzzled over it. It's actually part of his philosophy about Abraham's sacrifice and what happens when God tells you to do stuff like that. But that's getting ahead to next week's lesson. So we're at 0.56. I write this in Roman numerals, so it's point VI. So Melchizedek. So pay attention to the Joseph Smith translations. That Melchizedek was a child prodigy, that at a very young age he had the power to work miracles. This isn't in the Bible, and whatever translations you have other than the Joseph Smith translation, you're going to miss out on that. But also it ties Abraham with the covenant of Enoch, the covenant that Enoch made in the city of holiness, and that's the pattern. Everyone, we're trying to replicate what happened with the city of holiness in Enoch's day, and Melchizedek was able to do it, and Abraham was living in the days, and so he had a good example. In fact, Melchizedek was the spiritual leader of the day. Melchizedek blessed Abraham, and we sometimes kind of talk about the dispensation of Abraham. That's referenced in section 110, and talk about how Abraham was the church leader. That's not quite true. It was actually Melchizedek is the one who held keys, and Abraham paid tithing to Melchizedek as it's described. Another thing to do is compare Melchizedek's interaction with the king of Sodom. That when he goes to when Abraham goes to Melchizedek, he pays the tithes and he gets the sacrament from them, or bread and wine. But with the king of Sodom, how he talks about the war spoils, and Abraham says, "Yeah, I'm not going to collect any war spoils. I just want enough to cover my needs, but I'm not going to do a land grab." And when we fight, make sure that we're just not being kind of greedy and taking advantage of war. And that actually, as we get more enlightened, we follow Abraham's examples where we just don't profit off of war. Where are we at? So that's the two kings, Sodom and Melchizedek, and okay. So point 7 is Abraham and the mediation, because this is springboarding off of how he interacted with the king of Sodom, is that you remember that he is with his was it nephew Lot, that they have problems, their cattle were kind of grazing and his servants were getting with fights with each other. And so Abraham says, okay, look, let's resolve this issue. You choose which part, and I'll just do the opposite. And that's an important thing with mediation. It tells you the type of person Abraham was. He didn't try to scheme, and he wasn't doing these underhand deals. Is that, one, he addressed problems. He was able to say, okay, let's sit down and have a common sense adult why am I wearing these? Have a common sense adult discussion with Lot about the problems. He's able to work through the issues. In fact, he said, look, I'm willing to get taken to the cleaners in order to keep peace. So, that you're learning something about Abraham. And even with that, he's still a very prosperous person. Okay, you have point 8, Hagar. So this gets into back with polygamy, and we're going to be touching this off and on. It's in the Old Testament. I mean, some people, it's an issue. Some people say that God never commanded polygamy, and it's like, well, that's not true. He did. I mean, he commands it. And once again, I'd refer you to the church essays on plural marriages. But we learned a little bit about the law of Sarah. That is actually Sarah's idea for Abraham to marry Hagar, her servant, and you can read about that in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 132 and verse 65, and it's something called the law of Sarah. And this actually is where it comes from. That expression comes from Sarah and Hagar. And also pay attention, too, is that Hagar is the mother of, from what we understand, the Arabic people, that we tie into the house of Israel, and we have affiliations, but we're also very kind to Arabs, and we have good, peaceful relations with them, because we understand the Arabs are also descendants of Abraham, and they actually have part of the covenant. As you go read section 132, is it references Hagar and the descendants of Ishmael as having place in Abraham's covenant. So, just don't get caught up on one side of the issue. Which brings us to point 9, the covenant, and that's in Genesis chapter 17, and that's one of the best verses. Again, pay attention to the Joseph Smith translation, but you also want to read it in context of the book of Abraham, chapter 2, and it's verse 10 and 11. It says, I'll bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee, and in thee, that is thy priesthood, people who hold the priesthood of Abraham, and in thy seed, that is thy priesthood, and I'll give him to the promise that the right shall continue in thee, and in thy seed after thee. That is the literal seed of the body. And so when you use the expression seed, sometimes it's referring to the priesthood holders, and sometimes it's referring to the actual biological descendants of Abraham. And people get kind of tripped up that, but the distinction is important. In fact, you read about the priesthood of Abraham in section 84, verse 34. The sons of Moses and of Aaron and of Abraham is what's referenced to. So specific of the this is one is God's constantly referring. It's like, yeah, you're going to have seed as a children. It's funny because you read about how old Abraham is. Yeah, you're going to have children. You're going to have children. It just keeps on getting older and older. It doesn't happen until finally it does. So Abraham 2, Genesis 17. Pay attention to the name change, Abram to Abraham. And that's an important symbol. When you get a new name, it's a significant. It signifies something. Seed, children, yeah, marriage, family values, family proclamation. That's what we're about: is children and marriage and families. Getting ordained to the office of the priesthood, as we read about, is that Abraham didn't hold the priesthood and wanted to become a priesthood holder. Then you have the land promise. So that's something that kind of drives history. It's like, okay, who does the land belong to? Well, the land belongs to God, and He'll choose people to appoint it. Right now, that's only going to be it's something that Jesus Christ will have to do personally. We can't sort it out right now, and the church does not assume temporal powers over people. Read that, and it's a section, was it 134 on governments, and that's the basic. Here I am at 10 minutes. That's exactly where I want to be. And because this is get to the point, I want to be really quick about stuff. So here we are at the Christ quotient. So what are we learning about Jesus Christ? Well, Christ makes covenants, that we do covenants in the name of Christ. Covenants are what bind us. Covenants are what drive us. And this is what people misunderstand. The gospel isn't a set of rules. It's not a set of behaviors. It's not a checklist of tasks. It's not like rank advancement or earning something or getting promoted at work. It's about making covenants, forming families, getting ordained to the priesthood, and raising children in a priesthood household, and building up communities like this city of holiness that happened to that's just been the pattern for everything. So we come unto Christ by making covenants, and that is the point.